just a couple months ago, where draft analysts were discussing which running back would be the first one taken off the board in this year's NFL draft. Obviously, Bijan Robinson went 8th overall to the Atlanta Falcons, but just 4 picks after that, Jahmyr Gibbs went to the Detroit Lions, and today, those rookie running backs will face each other for the first time in their NFL careers. Atlanta is heading to Detroit to find their 3rd win of the season. Detroit looking to get back on that win column after an overtime loss last week to the Seattle Seahawks. Thank you guys so much for joining us for the Atlanta Falcons pregame show. My name is Taylor Vismor. Next to me, of course, is Rackley, and we're back in the studio this week. A little bit different feel for us this week.
But this is a beautiful studio, getting a chance to, I know we've already broken it in a couple of times, but for the first time in the regular season, you get a chance to see us here in the Ticketmaster studios as we break down all things Atlanta Falcons and Detroit Lions. Yeah,
first away game for the Falcons. We're going to really get into talking about it, but just quickly, what's the difference between a home game and an away game? Obviously, there are big differences, but for you?
Yeah, it takes a lot of focus, mental focus, because as a team, you know you're going to be fighting the crowd, right? Your defense, when you play at home, they know they're used to playing with all the noise and everything, but it's the offense operating on the road when you know you're going to face the noise. So it's executing the snap count, the silent counts that you've worked on in practice, because they always say you can turn on the speakers and the crowd noise as much as you want at practice, but it never truly stimulates what you're going to see inside of a stadium, nonetheless a closed stadium. So the noise is going to be there. They got to be able to navigate and execute with all that going on.
Yeah, so week 3, first time on the road, but the last 2 weeks has kind of been a little bit of a party for the Atlanta Falcons, going 2-0. And in case you missed it, don't worry, we've got a recap coming your way. Take a look.
And Atlanta's in front with 57 seconds left.
Right now, in this, right now, let's go.
One more time, boys, one more time.
Credit to the stadium and to the fans and everything like that. They made it hard for him. I mean, the center couldn't even hear his snap count from him being right behind him.
Quarterback start putting his hands over his ears, and the right tackle, left tackle can't really hear the cadence. Later on in the game, you've seen guys jumping off sides on the offensive side. We finally started getting home.
Green Bay gives it away on downs, and another one-possession win for Arthur Smith.
Atlanta now 8-3 in this building in their last 11 games.
Just understand that, when we play our brand of football, every single play, every single snap, then we're a really hard team to stop.
It's just going to be the same message every single week. It's all about us and what we do and how we execute.
Arthur Smith spoke to media earlier this week about what those challenges look like going against the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, Coach, the Lions, just looking at, some of the matchups, the interior of the ball on both sides. That's going to be a big battle for you.
And they've invested in there, and then I think they got one of the better centers in the league in Ragnow. Tougher than hell. Got a lot of respect for him. The whole line, they play hard. I think Hank Franley does a great job coaching them. I think they certainly, they got some good schemes, gap schemes they run, the zone stuff. They do a nice job. Use their tight ends well. St. Brown, he's a problem. Guys lines up all over the place. And then, of course, with Josh Reynolds been playing well for him. They got a lot of good players. Laporta's become a good security blanket for Goff. I mean, they got a good team. And then, of course, Khalif, I know really well from right down the road. Khalif made some big plays for him and a good returner. And then defensively, they structured, they're big inside, they're heavy-handed. And then on the edge, they do a good job, hard charging Hutchinson, Harris. Old Johnny, he'll be geeked up. He'll be in there in the mix. He'll be geeked up, ready to go. Loved coaching Johnny, but he's done a nice job there. And then the backers, right? They roll the backers. Barnes, tough. This goal hands alone. He's smart. Jack Campbell, highly instinctive player. Guy had 1 million tackles in college. I know they're a little bit they beat up on the back end, but they play well. They're smart, well coached. All those guys. So it's going to be a unique challenge. They got good special teams. It'll be a loud environment. We know they'll be ready to go. We know that we got to have our mind right We need to play really well. We're going into an extremely loud environment, and it'll be a fun challenge for us.
So I think it's clear that Arthur Smith knows, like anyone else in the NFL, that Ford Field is a pretty hostile environment. They've got a lot of offensive weapons to work with. So from that presser, when you look at this team and those offensive weapons that they have, what impresses you about this team?
Yeah, pretty good synopsis right there, the Detroit Lions from head coach Arthur Smith. And I think what you're looking at is you're going to see a quarterback, Jared Goff, that's confident when he plays at home, which it was interesting to me. Lions have scored 30-plus points in 9 of their last 12 home games going back to 2021. So they can score the football in their own building. Jared Goff, take that one step further. 39 touchdowns and 7 interceptions at home since he arrived in 2021. They feel very confident putting the football in the air. Amon-Ra St. Brown can be a problem, right?
Yeah.
These really good receivers come into his own, and I would imagine with some of the players that are out of the lineup, they're going to find ways to get him the football. They're going to put the ball in the air, get the ball into his hands, Reynolds' hands, and Jahmyr Gibbs' hands. They're going to find ways to get the ball into the hands of the guys that they have left that are still healthy on this team to try to move the football down the field. I feel like this is going to be a game where the pass defense and shutting down Jared Goff, keeping him in check is going to be so important to the Falcons' success today. If they're not able to slow him down, they're going to continue to put the football in the air. And I just talked about how confident Jared Goff is at home. We'll get to the inactives a little bit later, but slowing down St. Brown, Jared Goff is going to be extremely important.
Yeah, and of course, like you mentioned, there's a lot of people that are out for the Detroit Lions, and we'll talk about that a little bit later and when we get to the inactives. But something that he also mentioned was how loud that environment is. Last week against the Seattle Seahawks, they broke the decibel record for Ford Field. They had 127.5 decibels there. How do you even hear a snap count? How do you hear yourself think? In that loud
it's hard to quantify that until you've actually been in a stadium like that. And I've been in a few of them throughout my career. But way back in St. Louis, right, the RCA Dome, that's a long time ago, not even existed anymore. But in New Orleans as well, same thing. When you get into these dome stadiums that are really loud, it is difficult to listen, to communicate, but it just takes so much concentration, so much mental focus, because not only are you thinking about your assignment, what the guy across from you is doing, if he moves at all, now you're trying to think about when do I get off, because you may not hear a snap count, you may not hear a clapping of the hands from the quarterback that's coming behind. You might have to just use peripheral vision and see the center snapping the football. But guess what? The defensive lineman's looking at the exact same thing. So if you are a split second late on that, you are going to get beat, because that's just the NFL. These guys are so fast. Aiden Hutchinson wants to get off the line of scrimmage. He is looking at the exact same thing you are. So if you don't have that edge on whether it's a snap count, listening to Desmond Ridder, or it's the clap coming from shotgun, you're going to get beat because you're all looking at the same thing. Those are the things that you don't necessarily as an offense have to concern yourself when you're playing at home. Right. When you're playing on the road, all that operation, that mental focus gets amplified, and the team that executes that the best is going to come away with a victory.
Exactly. I know Terry Fontenot and the rest of the Falcons front office always talks about how games are won in the trenches, right?
Yeah.
And obviously the defensive side of the ball for the Atlanta Falcons is pretty seasoned. They've had a lot of years on their plate. They know how to go away and be in a quiet environment when they're on defense, and when they're at home when they're in a loud environment. But when you look at this offense, pretty young on all fronts of that offense. How does that change their perspective of a loud crowd when you don't have a lot of NFL experience and a lot of loud crowds that you've been to?
Well, I'll tell you, these are the situations, Taylor, where it really comes back to your quarterback, because a lot of people are going to look to the quarterback and they're going to say, what type of demeanor is he playing with? What does he look like on his face? Which I think there's an advantage with the Atlanta Falcons, because you look at Desmond Ridder and he is not affected. He does not wear his emotions on his sleeve in the middle of the game. He is very cool, very poised, and so they'll continue to look at the quarterback, because they're obviously looking at him to figure out what the play is, what the formation is, what the personnel is, who's coming on and off the field. As soon as you see panic in the quarterback, that starts to get younger players a little bit uneasy. But when you have the guy like a quarterback, a Desmond Ridder, or a Chris Lindstrom up front that have been there before, and they're cool, they're poised, everybody else kind of feeds off of that. So it starts with your quarterback, then it ends up going down to the rest of the veterans that have been there before. And if there is any uneasiness from a younger player, they look to those guys, and those are the ones that kind of, okay, well, if Lindstrom's cool, I'm cool.
Yeah, so obviously you just saw a couple of the guys getting off the bus at Ford Field, and someone I want to talk about that you might have seen is Jeff Okudah. And let's look at those Falcons inactives. Something has changed for the Dirty Birds today. Jeff Okudah, no longer inactive, is dressing out. What does that look like for the Falcons secondary?
Well, it obviously provides an element of depth, number one, and number two, it's maybe a little bit more personal for him. Obviously, the organization that drafted him 3rd overall out of Ohio State back in 2020. We do not see Jeff Okudah listed on the inactive list, so he will be playing. He will be in uniform. Whether or not he's starting, we don't know. We'll find out when we see that first snap come out defensively, but it brings in depth now. You're bringing in a former first rounder, a former top 5 pick that has got, as I've mentioned, maybe a little bit more personal because this is the team that drafted him and this is the team that obviously knows him. He knows some of this roster a little bit. So he's going to have a little extra added benefit to go out and play well today for as many snaps as he ends up getting.
Yeah, and obviously Jeff Okudah, as you mentioned, was traded earlier during the offseason. But everyone from the Detroit Lions has always said about Jeff Okudah, he's a great guy, and I'm happy he's found a place that seems to fit him a little bit more.
Yep.
Is this kind of a revenge game for Jeff Okudah, or do you think he's just going to go out there and just try to get some big plays down?
You know, it just depends. I mean, I would say Jeff Okudah is probably going to say he's going to treat this game like he treats any other game. And from a mental standpoint, yes, that's what he wants to do. Because if he thinks about, oh, I'm going to shut this guy down because he got me in practice 2 years ago, or I know this guy loves to do this, and if he does it to me, I'm going to get... If he starts doing that, that's pressing. Right now he's pressing and he's going to make a mistake. But if you just go and execute the defensive play call that was called, yes, you understand that the guy across from you might be really good at this or might be really good at that. You kind of log that back in your memory, but it's just about executing the play call that was called by your defensive coordinator and the defensive captains out on the field. It's not letting the moment get too much of you. Yeah, he's got a little personal added incentive to do well in this game, but he's just got to operate how he normally would.
Exactly. He's 1 of 11 is what that whole defense mantra is this year, as I'm just 1 of 11. I'm a small piece of the puzzle. But let's go ahead and take a look at this larger inactives list that the Detroit Lions have with bigger names on it. Of course, David Montgomery is going to be sitting this one out. We're going to see a little bit more of Jahmyr Gibbs today. And Taylor Decker was hurt in that first game against Kansas City and has not returned to the field since then. When you have those 2 big names out of this game for this offense, what does that do to Jared Goff and the rest of them?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously you've got a couple of offensive linemen that are not going to be in the lineup for them. You've got a starting running back that's got more physicality that's not going to be in the lineup. Basically, 5 of the 6 guys that you see there are starters or they're everyday rotational players that are playing a lot of football. Emmanuel Mosley in that rotation in the defensive backfield as well. Kirby Joseph, a starter that's not going to be active for them. But offensively, yes, that definitely hurts. When you think about 2 offensive linemen not being available, 2 very good ones, you start to question, are we going to be able to run the football well? What is my pass protection going to look like? These are things that maybe get logged in the back of Jared Goff's mind when he drops back to throw the football downfield trying to find Amon-Ra St. Brown. Is there going to be leakage? Flip that over. Think about the Atlanta's defensive side. Now you have to take advantage. You've got a couple of backups that are in the lineup. This is where you need to attack the line of scrimmage. You need to find a way to get in the backfield, get in the face, make Jared Goff feel your presence. Again, it doesn't always have to be sacks. Maybe it's just walking an offensive lineman that's playing with bad technique because he's a little bit more inexperienced, walking him back into the backfield and pushing him basically into the lap of Jared Goff. These are the opportunities. When you play a team that's a little bit more wounded, you've got to take advantage. And this is one of those where the defense needs to feast on this Detroit offense.
Exactly. Obviously, Taylor Decker out, as we mentioned. Also, Halapuli Vaitai also out.
Very well done.
Good, thank you. Thank you. It was making me a little bit nervous. I hate messing up people's names because I have a weird last name as well. So, chance for some really big holes and maybe some really big pressures for that defensive line from the Atlanta Falcons. Also, not to mention C.J. Gardner-Johnson and James Houston are also on IR for this Detroit Lions defense. Big misses for this team in the defense. What do you think Desmond Ridder will be able to do?
Well, here's what I'll say. Let me say this about the Lions first. Dan Campbell, he is kind of become that guy, the workhorse, the guy that's just the blue collar, right? He's going to find a way to motivate this team to say, guess what? We got to move past the injuries. It is life in the NFL, and maybe at some point Atlanta's going to end up having this same situation. Obviously, we have early on in the season not having guys like Cordell Patterson and Jeff Okudah in the lineup, but Atlanta more healthy than Detroit is in this matchup. But this is what you have to do as a head coach. You got to find a way to motivate your team and play through it. The moment that you start to feel sorry for yourself because X, Y, and Z is not playing in this game, that's the moment that you get beat. right? But when you trust the guys that come in, let's take Atlanta for example. Last week, Nate Landman. We were wondering about him. With now Troy Anderson being in the lineup, what was going to look like? He went out and balled last week, did exactly what he needed to do. What does that do? Kind of endears yourself to the coaching staff and the rest of your team that when you're in the lineup, I can count on that guy next to me. That's exactly what Jared Goff is going to try to do. With his 2 new offensive linemen today, I'm going to trust you. Now, it might not work out every single time, but I have to trust that you're going to do your job if we're going to go out and try to compete against a 2-0 Atlanta Falcons team today.
That's right. Big matchup coming up. And obviously, like we've mentioned, 2 big name running backs on either side for the Lions and the Falcons. So let's get to the keys of the game. What is your first key? I think it has something to do with the run game, maybe?
You think so?
Maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Probably stick to the strengths of this team. Keep pounding that run game for the Atlanta Falcons, averaging over 170 yards per game so far this season. Continue to use that 1-2 punch of Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. Find those seams, push this defensive line, and keep your offense on schedule. This is the best help for a younger quarterback in Desmond Ridder in his second year with the team is have that run game element to where now this defense has to start respecting play fakes in the backfield. You draw things up to the line of scrimmage, and that's going to open things up for his passing game behind it. But they got to continue to pound the run game. And even if Detroit ends up stuffing it early on in the game, one thing that we have seen from Arthur Smith, he won't abandon it. Do not abandon the run game, even if they don't get some of those successful runs early on. You got to continue to pound away at them and know that it's going to open up at some point throughout the course of the game.
I fully agree. I think it's going to be more of a pounding of the run game, not just running upfield, taking big chunks out of the field, if you will. But I think it's going to be more of a pounding of a run game. Obviously, Dan Campbell spoke to media earlier this week saying that when they were preparing for this game, they weren't looking at how they were going to do the run game. They were looking at how they were going to stop the Falcons' run game. Obviously, you have Bijan Robinson, who's this really shifty running back. He brings a different edge than Tyler Algier. He's going to get that first down. I think he's averaging, 7.5 yards per reception and 6.21 yards per carry. That's a lot of yards for a rookie to be getting. But then they bring in Tyler Algier, who's a totally different running back. I mean, he's going to hit you in the mouth, and he's going to take you with him. He's going to run downhill every time. So they've been focusing on how to shut this run down, and I think they might be having a run for their money today. Let's talk about your second key to the game, though.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this rookie running back matchup, Bijan Robinson against Jahmyr Gibbs, and I think they've got to keep Jahmyr Gibbs in check. Oddly enough, the top 2 running backs in this class, Jahmyr Gibbs is very similar in his style to Bijan Robinson as far as more of a slasher and his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. The difference is Jahmyr Gibbs, a little bit smaller body frame, probably about 15 pounds less, a couple inches shorter, but still very dangerous. Obviously, when he ended up leaving Georgia Tech, went to Alabama, he kind of got put in the limelight, and everybody got a chance to see how good of a player he is. So without David Montgomery, that's going to be their ticket in the backfield. They're going to find ways to try to get the ball into his hands, whether it's handing it off to him, little flares coming out of the backfield so he can catch the ball, maybe even lining him up in the slot, much like Atlanta does with Bijan Robinson, because he's got that electric nature to him. He can make people miss as well, but he's very versatile. They don't have to just hand him the ball. They're going to throw it to him as well. So they're going to have to keep him in check. You keep a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs in check, maybe now you're into second, third in the depth chart as far as running backs go. Now you've got this team a little bit more one-dimensional. Not to make that any easier, because Jared Goff very comfortable at home throwing the ball downfield. But if they're running it and throwing it, now you're in trouble on defense. Keep Jahmyr Gibbs in check, make him one-dimensional, then they can start to feast on the passing game.
And I think it goes without saying that he's going to be having a lot more time with the ball today because of David Montgomery sitting out, obviously, on inactives. But the question that we talked about earlier was how conditioned is this team? How conditioned is Jahmyr Gibbs to be in there for all 4 quarters, taking a lot of snaps and a lot of drives? How well will he do throughout this game? And if they keep pounding down on him, how long will it take until Jared Goff really just has to continue to throw and throw and throw, and he can't lean on Jahmyr Gibbs anymore?
He doesn't have a choice. I mean, that's why they drafted him top 15 overall. We feel like you're a difference maker, and there is going to come a point in the season, early on, game 3, where we need you to shoulder the load, like literally and figuratively. So they're going to get a chance to see how effective he can be throughout the course of a 60-minute football game, handling the majority of the load. If they want to stay in the game, he's one of their better playmakers.
And one of their best playmakers is none other than the guy under center, Jared Goff, who is part of your third key. Go ahead.
Yeah, they got to control him and Amon-Ra St. Brown in the passing game. So the 2 and 3, they kind of work together. You got to keep Jahmyr Gibbs in check. Then you do get him one-dimensional. Then these two guys are the ones that can't beat you. Yes, Reynolds had a couple of touchdown receptions last week, but Amon-Ra St. Brown is the security blanket for Jared Goff. And he's the guy that always finds a way to get open. So you got to control these guys. And I actually had to kind of change my key because it was shut down Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And at some point, you have to kind of acknowledge talent in the NFL and say, you're not necessarily going to hold this guy to 89 yards passing in the entire game, but can you control him? Can you make this a 189-yard game passing for Jared Goff? And maybe it's 1 or 2 touchdowns and it's an interception or 2, right? That's kind of the stat line that you're looking for from Jared Goff because he has the ability to make this a 325-yard passing game and 4 touchdowns if they don't make some plays in the passing game, if they don't understand where Amon-Ra St. Brown is, and if they're playing zone, if they're not passing him off when he's coming across the formation, he will make plays and he will make you pay for it. Those are the 2 guys they have to focus on in the passing game once they get those opportunities.
That's right. Jared Goff, obviously one of the better quarterbacks in this league. I think he's a little bit forgotten about. He kind of stays in the shadows a little bit, but he's there and he's pretty close to perfect a lot of the times with his throwing way downfield. And I think if you can shut them down, and something that I noticed during the Green Bay game was how much time Jordan Love had to let the wide receivers get all the way downfield to make those big plays. So I think if we can get maybe some Grady Jarrett, Calais Campbell pressures on Jared Goff and let him have way less time to let his wide receivers get way downfield, I think that will also help shutting him down.
Push him off the mark, basically. If you don't want Jared Goff to get the snap from center, sit back behind the line of scrimmage and be able to survey the defense. If he's doing that without being affected, and you could probably say that about most teams in the NFL with NFL quarterbacks, if you're not affecting them early on in the snap count, early on after he gets the football, problems are going to happen for your defense. Right. But again, if they can get a sack, if they can get him pushed off the mark and get him out on the run to where he kind of eliminates half the field, then maybe he's only got 1 or 2 receivers that he has an option and not 3 or 4. These are all ways that you can end up slowing him down. Maybe it doesn't necessarily get affected in the stat sheet, but it's something that you see those results on the field when he's not able to find his receivers because the pressure is affecting him.
That's right. Huge matchup today for the Atlanta Falcons. Still looking for to go 3-0 for the first time in 6 years. It's going to be a huge game, probably one of their toughest ones that they've had so far. Of course, next week we'll be back here in the studios while the Falcons are in London taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Right. Should be a really good time. But for until then, we're going to let you guys go, get ready for the game, and hopefully Falcons come home 3-0.
Being a Mercedes-Benz, like I said, is a different energy. It's a different atmosphere.
Arthur Smith and the Falcons win their opener.
You guys talk about the home win streak.
And it's reset and
That's not built from just me. That's built from the city. That's built from every single person that shows up in the Mercedes-Benz waving an Atlanta flag.
Bates has another interception. Jesse Bates, the pick in midfield. And the Falcons have now won 4 of their last 5 in this building. Play fake to Robinson. Here is Ritter. Over route. Looking deep for Pitts, who makes the catch. What a grab by Kyle Pitts. Here's Young. Straight drop. And he will be sacked. Oh boy. Agent Zero. Lorenzo Carter. 15 seconds left. First and goal, Atlanta at the 3. Snap to Ritter's low. He'll move left. Ritter's got to throw it, and he does. Touchdown Atlanta. And it's straight London. What a big time throw. the list.